which accepts the problems but does not accept the responsibility and tends to say it's someone else's problem. Like, we should get USA to do this for us. America should come and solve the terrorist problem somewhere, kind of thing. Or we have to figure out, well, if you don't like America, then maybe Russia is better. As if, we have to put ourselves for adoption. Somebody has to adopt. And I keep saying an elephant is too big to be adopted. You just cannot be looking in today's world for a benevolent guardian, parent. You have to learn to look after yourself. And that is what the message of my talk is. Looking at all the options, you have to come down and take responsibility for India and its civilization. The topic of my talk starts with, I want to recollect Hegde's 1992 speech on the rise of disruptive forces, in which he lists half a dozen what I call fragments. He called them disruptive forces. And these are identities or sub-nations within India that have a hard time with the rest of India. He says that for thousands of years, these groups did not have this kind of a problem with each other and with the nation. They were okay, and they would leave each other alone. And this business of intervening too much into their internal affairs has caused a reaction from these groups, and so they are becoming disruptive. As the talk goes on, you will see that I'm actually picking that theme and seeing how it has developed over the last 16, 17 years since he gave that talk, and how these disruptive forces have become fragments, and how these fragments have become global movements, some of them, with India as a sort of epicenter of these global movements. I will present 3 scenarios for India's future based on looking at the global civilizational encounters and internal fragments that are in tension with each other. Scenario A is where I'll spend a lot of my time. It is a negative scenario, and it has to be discussed and understood before we can move on. And that scenario says that India's fragments on these disruptive forces are going to get taken over as parts of, some part will go to the West, and some part will belong to an Islamic expansion, and some parts China may take over. And so India may actually be disintegrated, or large parts of it may be taken over. And this is what I call the fragmentation and disintegration of India scenario. And I will talk a fair amount about this. Second is that there are people who say India is not a nation but a culture. So what India are you talking about? It's a culture. And why are you trying to defend a nation? There's no nation. We are a value system. We have ideas and ideals. And as long as the culture lives, whether the nation lives is immaterial. And there is this mindset. A lot of people are here saying that. And I will discuss this scenario B, as basically short-lived. If B happens, then soon it will be A. Soon India will not exist, nor will its culture, because once the nation is not there as a container, as the vehicle, the vessel, which nurtures and protects and projects this culture, and this culture sort of scatters and is eaten up by various other civilizations, soon it will also dissolve. It will become parts of various other entities and lose its original self. And then scenario C is a positive one, which says that India emerges as a thriving nation state with its own civilization and helps the world. So really A and C are the 2 scenarios. B is sort of a very graceful and dignified way of ending up in A. It's a way of saying, okay, we lose with honor. We are finished, but we will say we won because our culture thrives. Okay? So it's like the deer saying, so what, the tiger will eat me up, but in the belly of the tiger I will be alive. And a tiger runs fast and I will be running fast, and I'll be part of his DNA, and I will nurture him and make him a loving creature from within. But it doesn't work, because after the deer has been eaten, the tiger remains a tiger. He's just a stronger tiger. So scenario B is kind of a delusionary kind of attitude you hear very often, particularly from very spiritual people who will say, what nation, what do you want to defend? The culture is good, it's doing well, they'll eat our food and listen to our music and do our yoga and wear our clothes and Bollywood they'll watch. And so it doesn't matter whether there is India or not, because we are basically a culture and that will survive. Now, globalization intensifies the competition among civilizations because there are some factors driving this competition, such as scarcity for world resources, growth of population, increasing expectations. People everywhere in the world want to live this page 3 American lifestyle. Everybody wants to be like that now. But there aren't enough resources in the world to have, soon there'll be 9 billion people by the middle of this century, and there just aren't enough resources to make that possible. And then there is the collective power of group identity. Groups are coalescing. Rather than group identity is going away, it is not happening. The opposite is happening. Certainly, if you know in India, the whole vote banks are intensifying, and that's group identities. So if it's happening in India, why would you expect it's not happening elsewhere? So on a global scale, it's the same thing. What we call vote bank identity politics is the same sort of thing which is happening on a civilizational level, where people feel that if they are able to negotiate and bargain and use groups collectively, then they can get a better deal. So this is not, this intensified competition is not going away. The reality, I feel, is that the West, China, Pan-Islam, each publicly project their claim of superior civilization and future domination of the world. And the United States certainly feels it's the leader and doesn't want to give that up. China certainly feels that by the middle of this century, it wants to be #1 in the world in every respect. That is a claim, it is public, there is nothing to be embarrassed about, they're not shy of it. And Islam has a doctrinal commitment to dominating the world. It's a doctrinal commitment. I realize that my term West is not as simple as that. America is separate, Europe is separate, but I'm going to use it in a way. My thesis is already very complex, and instead of having 3 civilizations, I could have put 5 or 8. It would not change the bottom line as far as India is concerned. So I'm using 3. I also realize that Islam is complex and there are many factions and many kinds of forces within Islam, but for my purposes, just calling it Islam suffices. Now these top 3 civilizations have the following attributes. Each has a collective superego with common values. Each has a very chauvinistic grand narrative of history, who we are, our ancestors, how they were great, and all kinds of glorifying ideas and stories about them. Each is committed to achieving global domination. Each actively nurtures its civilization and projects it via academics, education, media, and its policies. So it is not something that is on the fringes. This is very consciously done by each of these. United States has got major projects about its sense of history, its founding fathers, its parades, its monuments in Washington, presidential libraries, the great flag everywhere, even in front of a car dealership or in front of a gas station, great flag. A sense of nation, patriotism is larger than life. And this is not going away. In fact, it is getting stronger. All of this counteracts this idea that we live in the flat world where, my merit counts and so on. Now, here I've taken a grid. I've put the 3 civilizations I'm talking about in this study, and then I'm looking at what are the success factors. Well, I already talked about historical identity, and a sense of manifest destiny is a success factor. But also modern institutions are important as a sense of strength that you can rate all the civilizations. This grid I use in workshops with Westerners, with Chinese people, Islamic, and try to figure out their ideas of who's where on this grid. And it's very, very interesting to do this kind of exercise. Now, the modern institutions have 3 forms of capital. There is financial capital, there is political military capital, and there is intellectual capital. Now, we have a Varna system, which also I see Varna as a form of capital. I don't see Varna as caste or lineage of birth and all that. I see the Varnas are forms of capital. And the financial capital is Vaishya. The Vaishya Varna is commerce. So Bill Gates and Warren Buffett would be American Vaishyas. And Kshatriyas are political military capital. So governance, law, courts, Supreme Court, United Nations, international treaties, not just military, but all governance is Kshatriya capital. And nations and civilizations need that. Intellectual capital, we all know, is knowledge, know-how, that is Brahmanical capital. So one could also say that the job of a modern institution and a civilization is to enhance its Vaishya capital, its Kshatriya capital, and its Brahminical capital. And this is a very different view than the caste view. I'm viewing them as forms of capital. Now, if you look at China, they have a very explicitly stated plan and ambition to be the world leader by the middle of the century,